want the girl and the fella in the cover car. That's 2. 5 will be in the second car, number 2 car.
Never seen before. This is the planning and execution of an IRA bomb attack, filmed as it actually happened in 1972.
The second car will pull up outside the building. The girl in this car will take the bag containing the bomb into the building.
The Secret Army, an American documentary that has never been broadcast. These IRA volunteers allowed cameras to trace the stages of their planned attack in South Belfast. Their victory over the state seemed just one more bomb away.
It is very important that the volunteer in the Irish Republican Army is of good character.
The IRA leadership was dominated by men who had fought in the so-called border campaign in the 1950s.
He'd want to have a very sincere and genuine reason for joining. It's for the love of his country.
It was southern-based and often southern accented.
Classes consist largely of arms handling, bomb making, and urban guerrilla tactics. The instructors are IRA veterans who have come out of retirement to pass on their
I wasn't retired.
to the new generation of rebels.
I want to pass around these other weapons so you can get the feel of them.
Limerick man Desmond Long sat very close to the top of the IRA on the Army Executive for 17 years.
Weapons used by active service units in the northern conflict have been secured by IRA organizations.
That's yourself, isn't it? It is.
Some were brought into the country.
This weapon I'm handing around now, the Thompson submachine gun.
What was the average recruit like? Enthusiastic.
Good weapon, street fighting.
Some of them were in it for the wrong reason. I remember a fella saying one time he got a little M1 rifle and oh geez, he said, that'd be great for shooting blue noses. I said to him, what are blue noses? Prods, he said. So I whipped the weapon off him and said, we're training nobody here to shoot Protestants. You're here to take on the British forces.
Rory O'Brody was the public face of the Republican movement. The president of Sinn Féin, the IRA's political wing, here at a party meeting, he sat on the IRA's ruling Army Council.
I have served in almost every capacity in the Irish Republican movement in the past 22 years, right up to Adjutant General and even Chief of Staff.
Dáithí O'Connell, another Army Council member, also featured in the film.
One bears in mind that eventually that the innocent civilians pay a price, that price is not in vain, that from that sacrifice a better form of society will evolve.
Thanks, Sean.
And this is IRA leader Seamus Toomey on the left, later to be the Chief of Staff, captured in this unique footage inside the IRA war machine.
The British Army.
By 1972, the British Army's priority had changed from keeping the peace to seeking out the enemy, the IRA. Still, Army casualties rose.
It was rare for a week to go by without a number of casualties, particularly in Belfast. We were taking casualties almost continuously.
In many Catholic areas, the army was in direct conflict with the local population. By the summer of 1972, the army had killed more than 100 people, mostly unarmed civilians, in circumstances that remain controversial to this day. With Northern Ireland gripped in a cycle of escalating violence, the IRA presented itself as the defender of the Catholic community. The security forces faced no-go areas, the foremost, Free Derry.
Since August the 9th, 1971, 522 acres of the city of Londonderry has fenced itself in and the rest of the province out in a symbolic and practical declaration of independence that today excludes the implementation of laws that apply to the rest of us.
The British estimated that there were as many as 500 gunmen in Free Derry. Among them, a future IRA leader, Martin McGuinness.
The main reason for the armed patrols is internal security, you know. We will always take into considerations the feelings of the people of Derry, and these feelings will be passed on to our GHQ in Dublin, you know.
The IRA ensured the city was a part of the United Kingdom like no other. But even in this stronghold, the IRA faced demands for peace. The most wanted men in Ireland came to Free Derry to make an offer.
They haven't beaten the IRA, that they're not going to beat the IRA, that the only way to establish peace in Ireland is to sit down and talk to the leadership of the IRA.
The IRA, who the British dismissed as terrorists, were challenging the government to meet them as equals. Publicly, the British government stated it couldn't respond to ultimatums. Privately, it prepared to do exactly that. Ballyarnett, home to the McCorkle family on the outskirts of Derry.
It's only about 400 yards from the border, and it's really very easy to come from the southern side and come up the back fields to the house.
Ballyarnett was the chosen venue for the first secret meeting between the IRA and British officials. Both the British and the IRA trusted the family to host the talks. Michael McCorkle was Lord Lieutenant of Londonderry, the Queen's representative in the county. Aileen McCorkle helped run the Red Cross in Free Derry. She kept a secret record of the talks for more than 3 decades. It can now be revealed.
Sometime during the morning, a strange man walked up the drive. He said he was told to bring some people here.
And who do we think he was?
Well, I think he was obviously from the IRA side. And she goes on to say the 2 government officials arrived in the early afternoon.
This is the room in the McCorkle family home, where British government representatives met the IRA to discuss terms for a ceasefire and a proposed meeting with the Secretary of State, Willie Whitelaw.
Up to this point in time, the Provisional IRA have been seen as the authority in Free Derry.
The IRA was represented by one of the old guard, Darragh O'Connell,
Justice and order.
and one of the smartest of the new generation, 23-year-old Gerry Adams. He had been interned without trial by the British, but the IRA demanded that he be specially released to take part in talks. In the internment camps, Adams was already seen as more of a general than a foot soldier.
In the cages we had, people in who were, some of them were ex-paratroopers, you know, were giving people lectures on guns and stuff like that there. And there's one time we were having a lecture, this boy was telling us all about the AK-47. And Adams walked in, he says, everybody looked around seeing Adams and were very surprised. And he says, it's okay, I just want to keep my hand on, you know. And they all start to laugh, you know.
Why was that?
Okay. They think Jerry and guns don't go together.
Following the Ballyarnett meeting, terms for a ceasefire were agreed. One of the British officials wrote up this 6-page report afterwards, and he concluded that there was no doubt that Dáithí O'Connell and Gerry Adams wanted a ceasefire and a permanent end to violence. It paved the way for higher level talks. The IRA leadership would be brought to London. On the face of it, it was a remarkable achievement for the IRA. A little more than 2 years after they had begun their war, their bombs and bullets had helped bring down the Northern Ireland government and brought the British to peace talks. On the 7th of July 1972, 6 IRA leaders sat down with the British government here at Cheney Walk. On the IRA team, rising star Gerry Adams, and from Free Derry, Martin McGuinness. Prime Minister Ted Heath was briefed on the talks by Robert Armstrong.
The fact that these talks were happening was being kept deadly secret. We all felt, whatever the political objections were to being known to have talked direct to the IRA, it was the government's duty to do so if it had the chance, even if it had little hope of getting anything out of it. Nobody would have wanted to be in the position of saying we could have had talks, we turned them down.
The IRA went into the talks confident and defiant. Their chief demand was a British commitment to withdraw. As far as the British were concerned, the IRA was demanding their surrender. The talks went nowhere. "48 hours later, a crisis in Belfast. Catholic families fleeing loyalist intimidation had been granted houses in the west of the city, which once housed Protestants. As they prepared to move in, they were stopped by the army.
The lorries came down Landon Avenue and the intention of putting the people into houses, but the Brits stopped them and actually rammed the lorry with a Saracen.
The army said that they feared loyalist paramilitaries were going to attack the Catholic families. Tommy Gorman was there with Belfast IRA commander Seamus Toomey, who was arguing with army officers.
Toomey was giving his opinion on the whole thing, and at the end of it he said that you'll not brutalise my people.
And why was that significant?
I think it was significant. That was the signal that people were told to listen out for. Once that was said, the ceasefire was over, and there was a clatter of guns going off very, very quickly after that.
It looked and sounded very much like the end of the ceasefire. The army are up here in the middle of Lenadoon Avenue. They'd come here.
And that was the end of the ceasefire then?
That was the end of the ceasefire.
The IRA's push for victory resumed. Bloody Friday. More than 20 IRA bombs went off across Belfast. 9 people died, more than 130 people were injured. We have uncovered documents that reveal the army had been uneasy about the truce with the IRA. Yet Bloody Friday provided the opportunity for the British Army to counter with its own show of strength, codenamed Operation Motorman. David Ramsbottom, aide to the Army's most senior officer, wrote the papers.
Bloody Friday provided an admirable excuse to get Motorman in, and Motorman was seen as an ideal vehicle for getting rid of the no-go areas.
The invasion of the Bogside and Cregan estates began in a heavy downpour of rain at 4 a.m.
Under the cover of darkness, 28,000 troops broke down the IRA's no-go areas. It was the biggest military operation of the Troubles.
This is the Bogside, and it's an IRA stronghold no longer. The British Army is in complete control.
In Derry, the army killed 2 Catholics, one an unarmed IRA man, but met no real resistance. And we can reveal why. Many of the IRA's guns had been smuggled out of the city by this man.
As a Catholic and a Derry man, and who ultimately wants a 32 Ireland Republic, I wouldn't ask any Protestant to live as it's ruled at the moment in the 26. Wouldn't dream of it.
Brendan Duddy, a Derry businessman with contacts in the IRA and senior police. He was at the heart of a secret agreement to minimise the prospect of bloodshed by removing more than 50 IRA weapons from the city.
That was a very big dilemma for my father at the time, in the sense that, oh, now I'm landed with the army, the IRA's guns, but that was the agreement that they made. Eventually, they were taken over the border and they were handed back to someone, as the long and the short of it. And that's it.
Brendan Duddy's pivotal role brought him to the attention of British intelligence. Duddy, through his Republican connections, offered MI6 a direct line of contact with the IRA leadership. This role as a go-between would continue on and off for the rest of the Troubles.
Crawley came to a standstill as the coffins of a man and a 9-year-old girl were carried down the street where they died. 3 more funerals are to follow there, and another in a neighbouring village.
1972 was the bloodiest year of the Troubles. Almost 500 people were killed, the vast majority civilians. The IRA was responsible for more deaths than anyone else. The IRA leadership's year of victory was entering winter. There was another obstacle in the IRA's path to victory. 1 million Protestants opposed to a united Ireland. At one extreme, an estimated 20,000 joined the Ulster Defence Association, despite appearances then a legal paramilitary group. Loyalist paramilitaries claimed to be fighting the IRA, but they mostly killed Catholics.
The doctor's car was coming along here at around about 9 o'clock this morning when it ran into an ambush.
In 1973, in this poisonous atmosphere, the British government tried to introduce a political settlement. The Sunningdale Agreement gave Northern Ireland a government far removed from the old system of unionist rule. Moderate unionists agreed to share power with moderate nationalists. But a proposed role for the Irish government aggravated unionists' fears of a British sellout, all witnessed by the young civil servant who'd helped draft the agreement.
We'd been through a lot of very difficult years, and now there was, we hoped, a real prospect of settling the situation and getting steady the whole thing up. I remember the posters going up about, United Ireland is only a Sunningdale away. Even the talk of the Republic of Ireland was almost blasphemous.
In May 1974, the Ulster Workers' Council, a coalition of workers, unionist politicians and paramilitaries, called a general strike to oppose the power-sharing executive.
And the loyalist people of Ulster would have to solve this through the Workers' Council, and they asked the men, and they gave a show of hands to come out in bulk today, and we do not know when we'll go back.
Thousands walked out of work on day one. Some, at least, because of intimidation by loyalists.
I went in and I says, look, you have to go out, lads. Paramilitaries will be involved in this. And they said, right, so they went out, we had no difficulty.
And were you wearing glasses?
I was wearing dark glasses and a para jacket on, yes. I wouldn't deny that.
And the place emptied?
The place emptied.
It was described as a strike. It wasn't really a strike, it was an insurgency.
On day 3 of the strike, the 17th of May, loyalists attacked the Irish Republic. Bombs exploded in Dublin and Monaghan. 33 civilians and an unborn child were killed. It was the bloodiest day of the entire Troubles. On day 11, the new British Prime Minister Harold Wilson made this intervention, blasting the strikers.
People who spend their lives sponging on Westminster and British democracy and then systematically assault democratic methods. Who do these people think they are?
I'm doing 12-hour days at work. How would I be a sponger? Never had a day off sick. How would I? And that's what I think at the end of the day helped the strike. People was up in arms.
On day 14, the Sunningdale administration collapsed. Wilson's spongers had faced him down. Power sharing was dead. The strikers had won.
If Sunningdale had worked, we should have saved 20 years. And that can't be negligible. Mr. Wilson was not prepared to do what one would have had to do if you were going to overcome Ulster Unionist objections to it. Heath might have been.
Unionism had tested and smashed Westminster's resolve. The significance was clear to Irish government insiders.
Unionists were given the power to say no to any initiative, no matter how ambitious, no matter how modest, on the part of the British government in relation to Northern Ireland. In other words, they held all the cards.
Yet the IRA saw this very moment as an opportunity. If Unionists could break London's will, so could they.
We all know that you are beaten and that you may secretly be preparing to go home.
That autumn, IRA bombs brought death and devastation on an entirely new scale to England.
I walked up there, and when I saw the blood, well, it just about turned me. Then I saw two on the pavement the other side on stretchers. They were dead with blankets over them.
The killings of civilians in Guildford and Birmingham provoked outrage. But we now know that even at this very moment, the IRA was already considering another ceasefire.
There was word that we were going to be asked to vote for or against a possible ceasefire. And some people had very extreme views against any ceasefire, the sellout of their dead comrades and of the struggle and suffering of people so far. And others felt that we needed a ceasefire because of all the suffering and death and horror.
Every area was fucked except maybe South Armagh. We needed a breathing space. Aside from that, I've always believed that if things can be gained without fighting, you explore that.
Feakle, County Clare, in the west of Ireland. This is where the IRA Army Council came to in December 1974 to talk peace. The IRA had arranged to meet secretly with 8 Protestant clergymen. But the talks were raided by Irish police and army. It caused a sensation.
Well, they pulled this out today, I hadn't seen this in years.
Niall Smith was working at his family's hotel where the meeting took place.
One of the Protestant clergymen contacted my mother and asked him would she be willing to rent out the hotel as a whole. They requested that family only work in the hotel, and if we had any staff that would have been non-family, not to have them on.
The IRA had been tipped off and fled before the raid. The Irish state had discovered the talks were taking place and was determined to stop them.
My sense of anything to do with the Provisional IRA at that period was they were at least as big a threat to the Irish government as they were to anybody else. The only dealing Dublin would have with the Provisional IRA was to arrest them and jail them.
The IRA risked the arrest of its leadership to deliver a message to the clergymen. They would agree another truce if Britain would reconsider withdrawal from Ireland. Only one of the churchmen survives. Reverend Ralph Baxter left Northern Ireland for a new life in Canada in 1975. The memory of his meeting with the IRA remains vivid. Can you remember when the Irish Army arrived that evening?
The Army, a young fella had an automatic rifle.
which was pointed at my head, which was a bit off-putting. The IRA weren't there anymore, they were gone.
Ralph Baxter has never spoken publicly about the real agenda behind his meeting with the IRA. He and his colleagues were on a mission, secretly approved by the British Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, to sound out the IRA's true intentions.
We had Harold Wilson's blessing.
And you knew that?
Yeah.
How did you know that?
Well, we talked to them about what would happen if we met with the IRA. Would you recognise it? And they said yes. We met with them on behalf of the British government.
You were essentially there as emissaries of the...
Yeah, we were. It was the only role we could have. We didn't have any other role.
Today, Ralph Baxter describes an IRA leadership that was aware their year of victory had long passed.
They wanted peace because they wanted out. Why they wanted out is another thing altogether. But that's where we started.
Did you think they wanted peace, yeah?
Yeah, they did.
In the city centre this morning, the Christmas rush was able to go ahead with rather more confidence than in the past.
Reverend Baxter and his colleagues had taken a risk, but it looked to have paid off. The IRA called a ceasefire just before Christmas. The scene was set for one of the most decisive chapters of the Troubles. The clergyman brought back the simple message that the IRA was willing to talk if British withdrawal was on the table. London's response would come through a secret back channel, a man British intelligence had come to call the Contact.
What sort of a man was Brendan Duddy?
We had 50 employees in 1967-68. We've now got 5.
You could be sitting in Brendan's chip shop, 2 o'clock in the morning, all the ordinary customers, as it were, are gone, and Brendan will be explaining something with the help of vinegar bottles and salt cellars and ashtrays, you know. There's the Brits, Provost. Business community.
When people like ourselves get so fed up with violence that we're prepared to go a little bit further to meet each other's point of view. And I think that is coming, and I think it is coming just as inevitably as you're turning the pages of a book.
He was a strategist, Brendan, but he was, at all times, he was a strategist for other people. He could explain to you what their strategy was and what it ought to be.
But nobody knew that Duddy had already spent months building a line of communication between British intelligence and its enemy. With a temporary ceasefire in place, he was asked to help set up face-to-face talks with MI6 and the IRA leadership. Duddy worked with 2 others. One, a young priest at the heart of life and death in the Bogside, Father Dennis Bradley. British intelligence knew them as the Derry Link.
Did you think this is for real?
Well, I thought it was for real. Did I have any idea of how it would end up? I knew how it would start, but I didn't know how it would end up.
For the IRA, the prize was British withdrawal. The risk for the IRA leadership was a British trap, being lured into open-ended talks simply to stop the armed campaign. To build trust, the British released some Republican internees. In return, the IRA agreed not to target Crown forces and called an open-ended ceasefire. Remarkably, some of the most intimate details of the talks that followed survive and are now to be found in Galway University.
Brendan Duddy kept a diary of the entire process, and the full contents of this diary have never been made public. But in here you have the secret history of the ceasefire, a ceasefire which helped define the course of the Troubles.
Brendan Duddy set up every meeting between the British and the IRA. Among the revelations in his diaries, the fact that the British had agreed to discuss withdrawal. The Belfast IRA commander, Billy McKee, was at the negotiating table.
On the table, a British withdrawal. They came to us, they sent for us at that time. We didn't go to them.
How many times would you have met with British representatives?
Over a dozen times.
And you were convinced they were serious?
It was very French, they were very serious.
I brought Billy across the border 3 or 4 times into those negotiations using my father's driving licence, because Billy would have been around the same age as my father.
To meet with British officials?
Yeah.
The talks were secret, but rumours of British withdrawal spread. For some in the Unionist community and the security forces, that posed a threat of betrayal. Amid growing distrust, the arrest of a Derry man wanted for bombing London put the ceasefire in jeopardy.
Men with pistols pointed at my head and said, "Don't move. We're RUC, we're arresting you." They said to me in the car, "I'm going to use you, the London bomber, to wreck this fucking ceasefire." 2 thoughts hit me, one was I could be released shortly if the ceasefire works, or I could not be released shortly if it fails, and if it fails, the Derry Brigade are going to strike the RUC.
The diaries record this arrest, and 2 days later, how the IRA responded by killing police officer Paul Gray. The truce held, but only between the IRA and the British Army. Sectarian slaughter came to the fore. In July, 3 members of the Miami Show Band, an Irish pop group, were killed by the loyalist Ulster Volunteer Force. The murder gang included serving and former members of the British Army's locally recruited Ulster Defence Regiment. 5 civilians were killed in an IRA bomb and gun attack on a bar on the loyalist Shankill Road. Many Republicans feared the IRA, no longer attacking British soldiers, was being diverted into a purely sectarian civil war.
It's a tit for tat too. That's what it goes, it comes down to it, and the Brits are standing back being the good guys. Let them kill themselves, let them kill each other.
Divis Tower, Belfast. This is where former IRA commander Brendan Hughes spent his final years reflecting on the past. By 1975, his friend Gerry Adams had been rearrested and returned to the IRA compounds of the Long Kesh internment camp. Together, they began to question why the IRA leadership stuck with a truce that seemed mainly to benefit the British.
Every other day, we had directives coming from the leadership of the camp telling us we have fought the British to a standstill. The British won out. We're negotiating with the British now, and it's only a matter of time before they go, before the boats sail out of Belfast Lough. At the same time, when these were being said, I mean, there was bombs going off the Shankill Road, there was bombs going off on the Falls Road, there was bombs going off all over the place. There was Protestants getting shot, there was Catholics getting shot, but there was no British getting shot.
The talks stalled. Duddy writes despairingly of the lack of real progress from the British, insisting the IRA has been given little to show for entering the process.
As weeks moved into months, the diaries reveal growing tensions in the IRA, and one name stands out: Martin McGuinness.
He was very suspicious of what was going on and wasn't particularly in agreement with it, and was quite angry with what was going on, and being kept out of the loop too, because they weren't being told.
And he was saying this to you?
Yep.
Duddy's diaries paint McGuinness as an aggressive militarist at odds with Rory O'Brady. He is described as a little Hitler, determined to run the IRA not only in Derry, but in all Ireland.
Then, in September 1975, Brendan Duddy reveals that he has made an extraordinary intervention. He writes that he has recommended to the IRA that they bomb a number of economic targets in England and Northern Ireland, stressing there should be no deaths. It seems that he believes that only this new bombing campaign will force the British to make terms with the IRA and bring peace.
The IRA resumed its bombing campaign, and there were casualties. Meetings with the British were suspended. Meanwhile, loyalist violence raged. The spiral of sectarian murder continued. At the start of 1976, loyalists killed 3 members of the Reevy family and 3 members of the O'Dowd family in County Armagh. 24 hours later, the IRA killed 10 Protestant workers at King's Mills. Like other sectarian attacks of that period, the IRA didn't admit to carrying it out. By now, the 1975 ceasefire had become meaningless, and it had lost the confidence of many senior members of the IRA. The diary records that the IRA executive, which appointed the leadership, voted to return to war by 10 votes to 0.
75 ceasefire was a disaster, an absolute disaster. The Army executive were against it from day one. We didn't agree with the truce in 75 and told him it should be finished.
And were you consistent in 75? Were you saying that throughout 75?
Oh, well, yes, we said it quite a number of times. In the end, we put the resolution, which was passed unanimously.
A public declaration of intent to withdraw by the British never came. Many years on, Billy McKee maintained withdrawal was on offer.
The way it looked, they were willing to get out.
Did you trust the British?
Quite honestly, I couldn't. But they could use it later on, say we had it there offered and they wouldn't take it. So we had to play along with it.
The effort to bring the IRA from war to peace failed, perhaps because it was eclipsed by another agenda.
This document, written by the most senior official at the Northern Ireland office, appears to outline the British strategy almost from the outset. It speaks of weakening the IRA by stringing them along.
Did the IRA fall for British trickery? Republicans are still divided over whether the ceasefire was a mistake.
Were they conned?
I think they were, but the Brits allow us, can you? They were all conned.
I don't accept that. The IRA used that opportunity. I mean, I was in Derry and Belfast particularly, regularly throughout this period. McKee was in charge in Belfast, McGuinness was in charge in Derry, and they used the period to rebuild IRA structures and so on and so forth, successfully. And, you know, while exploring peace, they were preparing for war.
The 1975 ceasefire did transform the conflict, but not necessarily in ways the government intended. A new and more militant IRA leadership had been forming up inside the internment camps and prisons.
Word was abroad that changes were occurring in Long Kesh. A new young crowd took over Long Kesh, and their influence began to work its way into the Belfast Brigade.
There was a great deal of resentment from people like myself towards Daithí and Rory, who were seen as people from down south who didn't know what the war was all about. Myself and Jerry, specifically Jerry, seen what was taking place and realised that this has to be stopped one way or the other. And that's when the whole thing came about, talking and conspiring about trying to get rid of this leadership, because this leadership was leading us up the garden path.
Those who took the IRA into the ceasefire would see their authority start to fade. The IRA's year of victory never materialised. A younger generation prepared to take charge from the veterans who had led the war from the start.
Nice class.
The new leadership would be mostly northern accented.
The brash horror of Belfast, the realistic horror of daily life in Belfast for IRA people, IRA volunteers, you know, killing and being killed. The reality for the Belfast Brigade of the most terrible war. These people in the 26 counties of the Republic of Ireland knew nothing about that.
I'd like to go into conditions of membership of the IRA. Of course, these are subject.
They were to be shaved off and gotten rid of, regardless. And the people in Belfast who felt that they were at the centre of the earth, they were going to take over the Republican movement and win the war on their terms.
Martin McGuinness was no longer the young Derry gunman. By early 1976, he was on the IRA's ruling Army Council. The new leadership prepared for a protracted and grinding campaign, what they termed the Long War. The British could also see the coming war of attrition.
The government had hoped to squeeze the IRA out of existence, but this secret army report, written in 1978, concluded that the IRA was well equipped, more professional, and capable of waging war for the foreseeable future.
We have obtained other secret British Army reports that reveal they had no doubts about who was driving change in the IRA.
Who did Army Intelligence tell you was responsible for the reorganisation of this?
Well, this is where Gerry Adams's name came up, because he was held to be the Chief of Staff or whatever, responsible for quite a lot of the coordination of that.
We are either for the people or we are opposed to them. And I think it must be a basic tactic, a basic principle of republicanism that we fight on behalf of the people. We fight because the people want us to fight.
This is Gerry Adams after his release from jail in 1977. he maintains he was never in the IRA. His only convictions are for attempting to escape internment. However, numerous sources state he was a long-standing member of the IRA's ruling Army Council and briefly its Chief of Staff.
Did you meet Adams?
Actually, I met Adams on numerous occasions.
You were a member of the IRA Army Executive.
I was, yes.
And you were meeting Gerry Adams as a member of the IRA.
The chairman of the Army Council would turn up to the executive meetings. We were meeting at least every 4 months.
And who was that chairman in your memory in this instance?
Gerry Adams.
But Adams wasn't in the IRA.
You can't be on the Army Council unless you're a volunteer. And you can't be chairman of the Army Council unless you're a member of the Army Council. And I sat opposite him at meetings. This lie he comes over, I was never in the area. That's a lie. And I'm saying that now as having sat opposite him in meetings. Probably get shot for it, but I'm saying it.
Gerry Adams declined to take part in this series. Des Long fell out with Adams in 1986 during a wider Republican split.
We could not survive almost 8 years of war unless people wanted to billet us, to look after us, to drive us about, unless they wanted to support us.
What did the Army make of Adams by 1978-79?
I was sort of aware that he was a highly intelligent man and that he had never used a pistol or thrown a bomb. But he was definitely a strategic planner of the highest order. And he was, I thought, certainly he was directing the political direction of the IRA.
Adams and Martin McGuinness would go on to dominate the Republican movement as it waged the Long War. As the 1970s came to an end, the conflict was expanding in ways few could ever have foreseen.
There had been a telephone warning, but with 500 revellers inside and only 5 minutes' notice, the police had no chance to act on it.
Arguably, the ceasefire was little more than a series of missed opportunities. Over 2,000 more people would die.
At the end of the day, what was it all about? I mean, what the fuck was it all about? I could have done a lot better things. Yeah.
Tommy, when you think back, do you just think it was just nothing, it wasn't worth it?
It was a waste of time and a waste of life.
For nearly 50 years, Canada has been home for Ralph Baxter and his family. Exiled by loyalist paramilitaries for talking to the IRA.
Were you threatened?
Yes, but...
Who threatened you?
The UDA.
In the eyes of the Ulster Defence Association, Ralph Baxter's sin was to seek peace with the IRA.
What did they say? Can you remember?
They would remove us from the scene, if possible. And they would do it to the family as well.
can I show you something? I've got a couple of letters for you.
Correspondence from almost half a century ago, when peace briefly seemed possible.
75.
Ralph's letters to the hotelier in County Clare, where the talks had been held all those years ago, preserved in appreciation.
I didn't know it existed.
It speaks of a time, doesn't it?
It certainly does, yeah. You're right.